I felt like I was in the ocean and waves were just crashing over me and I was getting pulled under the water and I was stuck in like a riptide and I couldn't get out. Welcome to the video. Yay! I'm just sitting down to breakfast. My mom had this unreal purple sweet potato. She's stunning. So I'm having eggs, sweet potatoes, spinach, and another cup of coffee. But today I wanted to do a more, I guess, like personal video and talk about my mental health journey, which is something that I talk about a lot on Instagram. But it's also a lot to talk about on Instagram because it's so much and there's such a history with it. This is gonna be like a mukbang. Let's get into it. I feel like I will be talking about some mental health subjects related to like anxiety, OCD, depression, all that stuff. So if that's triggering for you in any way, feel free to skip this video. Let's start from the beginning, shall we? When I was 5, maybe even 4, I remember lying awake at night in bed, terrified that somebody was going to kidnap me. Like, I would have these vivid memory or like these vivid fears, but they felt so real, of like somebody putting a ladder up against the side of my house and like climbing it and climbing into my window and like snatching me in the night. And they were so detailed. And I remember talking to my mom about it and being like, I'm terrified that I can't go to sleep. And my mom was like, honey, if somebody threw a ladder against the wall, we'd hear it. Like, it's not just gonna be like, nobody's gonna hear that, you know? And nobody's like driving around with their ladder on their car at like 1 a.m. But no matter how much she tried to like soothe me, it never worked. It was like my brain was stuck on an endless loop about this fear and I couldn't get off. No matter what anybody told me, nothing felt comforting. Nothing made me feel better. I just felt more and more and more anxious until one day I wasn't afraid of it anymore. That happened like periodically throughout my childhood, throughout my like early teen years, into college. Every couple years, I would have what I called this like anxiety spell because I didn't know how to describe it. I was little and I just knew that it was like all I could think about. Like it took over my brain. And the topics varied as I grew up. And I would talk to my mom about it, obviously. And my mom was really, really helpful. But at that point, we just didn't really know like what it was or like what it meant. But finally, when I was like 10 and I was having another one of these spells, I was talking to my mom about it and she was like, let's go see like a counselor. So we went to go see like a town counselor. This was like my first experience with like a therapist. And she was amazing. And she kind of tried like the realistic approach with me too, of just being like, look, the odds that the stuff that you're afraid of happens is so slim, like you don't need to worry about it. But same thing, even talking to her, I didn't feel any better. It was like my brain couldn't let it go. Like, no matter how much I tried, my brain couldn't let it go. And then one day I just woke up and it was like I didn't care about it anymore and I wasn't afraid anymore. And it was almost like this fog had lifted. Like I was happy again. I wasn't afraid anymore. And I was like back to my old self. The spells would last like anywhere from a couple months to like a full year of me like really worrying and panicking about this thing. And it like wasn't enough for me to like not go to school. Like I still went to school, I still had friends, I still played soccer, I still did all the activities I wanted to do, but it was just something I thought about every single day, all day long. This goes on until college, like junior year of college. My best friends in college go abroad. I didn't go abroad. So I'm with other friends, but like not my best friends. And I start to have one of these spells again. And it had been a few years since I had had one. Like the one before this, so at this point I was like 20 years old. The one before this was when I was like 15. So it had been like 5 years since this had happened, and I forgot how intense they were. And all of a sudden I was so scared that nobody liked me and that everybody secretly hated me, and they all talked about me behind my back. Like, I was just so terrified that everybody hated me. And it was all I could think about. I would go to parties and I was like, everybody here hates me. Like, I would go to pre-games, everybody here hates me. And it was all I could think about all day long. And it kind of went into that spell again where I just felt this like anxious anxiety. Like I would wake up in the morning at like 5 a.m. with my heart just pounding. And it felt like there was like an elephant sitting on my chest and I couldn't fall back asleep. And then finally I would like calm myself down and get started for my day. And as I went about the day, it would get a little bit better, but it was like the morning and the night was the worst because I was really alone with my thoughts. I wasn't in class. I wasn't distracted. I wasn't trying to do homework. I was like really just alone with my thoughts. And I was so just consumed by it. I didn't know how to talk to people about it. Like, these weren't my closest friends. So it's not like I could just be like, hey, I think I'm having a panic attack, girl, in biology class. Love you. I guess I could have, but in my head, I don't know, I felt like I couldn't talk to people about it. And it got to the point where I was like calling my mom and I was like, I need to come home. Like, I don't want to be in school right now. I'm so anxious, I need to come home. And coincidentally, this was right around fall break. So I did go home for fall break, which at my school was like a 5 or 6 day long break. Went home, and my mom is a legend. She got me in with a therapist who was specialized in anxiety, like very well known in our area, anxiety specialist. And she got me in with my psychiatrist. And within like these 5 days that I was home, I had my first 2 or 3 appointments with a therapist. I went like every single day for sort of like crisis management. And then I saw this psychiatrist and she put me back on an SSRI, and she also put me on a benzodiazepine for like the panic attack feeling. Like when I was really panicky and my heart was beating out of my chest, but I was very scared of taking those because I didn't want to be like addicted to them. So we did like a very low dose only for like 10 days to just sort of get me over the hump until the SSRI kicked in. But so it was like an intense 5 days of like mental health crisis prevention, basically. And when the 5 days were up, I obviously didn't feel any better because it doesn't happen that fast. Like, it's not like a switch goes off and you're like, oh, I'm better. Like, I had to go back to school. And I was begging my mom, I was like, I don't want to go back. Like, I'm so, like, just so nervous and anxious. And my mom and the therapist was like the first person I've ever worked with who explained anxiety to me in like a science way. Like, he sat me down and was like, the way your anxiety works is it's preventing you from doing this thing, or it wants you to not do this thing. Like in your brain, it's like, you shouldn't go back to school, and then you'll feel relief. And you work yourself up, it's almost like a bell curve. You work yourself up, you feel more anxious, more anxious, more anxious. You do this thing that relieves you, that relieves the anxiety, and then immediately you feel relief. But that's reinforcing your brain to continue that loop. It's positive reinforcement for your anxiety. So your anxiety does it again. You go up the bell curve. You give yourself relief, whatever that thing is. For me, it was like calling my mom, not socializing, staying in my dorm room, all of these things that through working with the therapist, I realized were like my coping mechanisms, was reinforcing the anxiety and actually making it worse over time. And he was like, if you stop doing that thing that you're using as like your relief, eventually your brain is going to learn like, oh, I'm not getting the same satisfaction that I used to get. So the anxiety is going to go down, and you're basically going to create a new neural pathway inside of your brain. So he was like, it takes time, but you have to resist the urge to do what the anxiety is telling you to do. So if the anxiety wants you to stay in and not go to the party, you have to go to the party. If your anxiety wants you to not go back to school and to like stay home the rest of the semester, you need to go back to school. After those 5 days home, I was on my SSRI. I had like weekly appointments by phone with my therapist scheduled. I went back to school, And it was hard, like it was really hard. But I almost felt better because I had like a plan, and I had this person that I was working with that knew so much about anxiety and who explained it to me in such a rational, logical way that my brain was just like, this makes sense. Like, this scientifically makes sense. I can wrap my head around it. It's not this like mystical beast thing anymore. And I'm not afraid. I had been diagnosed with like general anxiety disorder. My therapist was like, that seems like it's kind of what's going on. And he gave me that sort of like treatment protocol. I would call him every week. We would have our sessions. He also gave me these like meditations to do whenever I was feeling anxious, and these sort of visualizations. He would tell me to picture a door in the front of my chest and then a door in the back of my chest, and that I could open each, and the anxiety would sort of, or the thought that I was having would like flow through the door instead of attaching. So he was basically helping me practice mindfulness where I wasn't attaching to my thoughts. I didn't realize that's what I was doing at the time. I just thought these were like guided meditations, but he was basically teaching me mindfulness and to like notice my thoughts, but not attach myself to my thoughts and not give them value. I did that, and slowly but surely, once the SSRI kicked in, and once I sort of had this treatment protocol, and once I stopped using my like not so great coping mechanisms, or I stopped listening to what the anxiety was telling me to do, I started to feel better. That honestly was like the last spell that I had for a while. And when I was on my SSRI, I've always kind of been on and off of it. And I think this is kind of the double-edged sword with mental health and with medication and therapy, is that like when you feel like something is going good, you're like, oh cool, like I feel great, I don't need this anymore. So you stop going to therapy, you stop taking your medication, and then you start to feel really terrible again. And then when Ben and I like started to hang out and date, I was back at home looking for jobs. Ben was looking for jobs. We were both living with our parents, like newly dating, hanging out with all of our friends, going out all the time. And it was the time of my life. Like I was so happy. And I got a job, which was so exciting. But the job was in Boston. And that meant that I would be long distance from Ben. I put long distance in quotation marks because he was in Connecticut. So it was like, like a 3-hour drive. But it felt like long distance because I couldn't just see him on the weekdays. You know, we would see each other like every other weekend. So when I got this job, I started to feel it again. And I remember laying next to Ben and being like, it's happening again. Like, this hasn't happened since I was a junior in college, but I know what this is. And I know what's happening. And immediately my first response was like, I need to go back to that therapist because I loved him so much, and I need to get back on my SSRIs, my medication. So I went back to my psychiatrist, went back to my therapist, and started to do the same practices and protocols that I had done before. I was like coming up with reasons of like why I shouldn't take the job, of like why I should just stay in Connecticut and look for another job, like stay with Ben, why I shouldn't move. I was coming up with all these reasons of like, and my anxiety was trying to convince me to do those things. So the hard part was resisting that, and was, not only like resisting it, but also continuing to move forward with moving to Boston. So I was in the middle of looking for roommates, finding an apartment, deciding whether or not I needed to bring my car or if I should leave my car at home. All of these things. It's tough with anxiety because it's like when you're feeling it, it doesn't go away immediately, like I said earlier. So you need to be patient, but sometimes that means you're going through life like business as usual when you're super uncomfortable. The way that I've like found my anxiety works is the moment I get there and the moment I just like push through whatever is scaring me, it starts to get better pretty much immediately right after I get there. So it was just getting there and facing what was scaring me, and immediately I started to sort of round that corner, So fresh, so clean. There's nothing better than a shower. I feel like I go back and forth between being like a morning shower and an evening showerer. That sounds wrong. And right now I'm in the evening shower camp and it's lovely. But I wanted to continue where I left off with my mental health journey. And where I left off was I had moved to Boston. I had successfully navigated like another anxiety spell. I was all good. At this point I was 24 and Ben and I were moving into our first apartment together. That was when my most recent eating disorder happened and got really bad. And looking back, I can tell that it got bad and that it happened because I was feeling so anxious about this new phase of life and about this upcoming move with Ben. Because if you've been in like a long-term relationship with anybody and you live together, it's totally normal to like be nervous about that and to wonder if you're making the right decision. I don't know, I had a lot of worries and doubts and questions about whether or not it was the right decision, and looking back now, that was all anxiety. But all that anxiety came out through my eating disorder because it was a way for me to control something when I was feeling so anxious and when life was changing again. And as I recovered from my eating disorder, Ben was like such a rock throughout that for me. We lived together. He held me accountable for all of my meals. He would help distract me if I was feeling guilty after meals. And he was really there for me as like the best way that he could have been. And right as I was starting to really kind of like my weight was starting to stabilize and I was kind of weight restored, Ben got a job offer and we moved to San Francisco. We were in San Francisco for like a year and a half. When we got engaged, slowly but surely, the anxiety started to come back. And I didn't think it would. Like in my head, I was like, I love this person. Like, of course, I'm not gonna feel any anxiety about this decision. And deep down, I was so excited about getting married and about marrying Ben. But I still felt that creeping, kind of like clawing anxiety. And it just slowly built up, starting like from when we got engaged all the way through that winter. We were about to go back to San Francisco. We were literally like, and my mom was like, you don't seem good. Like you seem like something's wrong again. What's going on? And I was like, honestly, I don't know, but I'm having that feeling, that same feeling of like panic and worry. And deep down, I was having a lot of anxiety about marriage and about this big life change. And the thing about anxiety that's so trippy is that it convinces you that it's valid. So when you're anxious about something like an amazing new job opportunity, or like marrying your life partner and best friend, or moving across the country, like if you're anxious about these things that you were so excited about for so long. Like I had been waiting for Ben to propose for like a year. And then all of a sudden I was anxious about it. And my brain was convincing me, I don't know if you guys should get married. I don't know if you're meant to be together. Maybe this is a big mistake. Like, let's think about all these potential flaws that could happen, or all of these like what ifs. And all of a sudden, something that's like so joyous becomes so scary. And that's what's so messed up about anxiety, is that it makes you like second guess everything. I definitely have generalized anxiety disorder, but I could feel the obsessiveness with which I was thinking about things was more than just generalized anxiety disorder. So I started to do some research, particularly about like feeling anxious in a relationship and feeling anxious about like big relationship decisions. And I discovered relationship OCD. I have a lot of thoughts about like TikTok and mental health because I think it's really empowering and really cool that people can go on TikTok and any other social media platform, but I just feel like TikTok has really popularized it, and talk about their mental health. I think it's amazing. But the downside of that is that people that are scared and anxious or feeling depressed, feeling a lot of feelings, will then go on TikTok and see a 10-second video listing 5 criteria for OCD that could also be the same criteria as being tired or, you know, any other like thing, and they'll self-diagnose. Trying to tell somebody how to diagnose themselves with something on social media is a very tricky thing. I started talking to my therapist, was the same one that I've seen since college at this point. I started talking to him again and was like, look, I have this feeling like I shouldn't be marrying Ben, like I'm making a huge mistake. I spend so much time thinking about it every single day, and I look for flaws. I look for flaws in Ben, I look for flaws in our relationship, and then I make him reassure me that we're a good match. And my therapist was like, hold on. Time out. Tell me about that loop. The fact that it sort of is like, I obsess, I do this thing, like ask for reassurance or, you know, have some sort of like big argument that I feel like gives me a lot of closure. I feel better temporarily, and then within a few hours, I obsess again. And if I don't do that thing, that like relief, I feel so anxious that it's like crippling. And he was like, I think you do have OCD. And we went back and kind of were like talking about my childhood and my life and all of my other anxiety spells. And he was like, I think it's always been kind of like OCD, but because I didn't have compulsions in the sense that I wasn't like tapping or counting or cleaning or washing that are super overt, it went kind of undiagnosed as anxiety. And he was like, I do still think you have like generalized anxiety, but the loop that I get into is much more OCD-like. The compulsion isn't always physical. It can sometimes be a mental compulsion, something that I do inside of my head that makes me feel better. And then the anxiety goes away. And sometimes I have to do that compulsion a couple of times to get the relief. And it's not always the same number of times. It's until it feels just right. Like until it feels right in my head, and then I feel relaxed. So moral of the story is that's sort of how I like realized that I have OCD. I was in the middle of this a really bad OCD period, and I started to get, for the first time in my life, like very depressed. And I had sort of explained to my therapist, like the spells that I have, when I sink into them, it's almost like I just don't feel like myself. Like I can still go through the motions. I can still get up and go to work every day. I can still like go out to dinner if I have to, but I don't feel anything. Like I feel numb. And I feel just hopeless. And the longer the OCD and the really bad anxiety lasts, the more I feel like it's never gonna get better. And I forget what life was like before I felt that bad. Talking to him about that, he was like, yeah, I mean, like, it's not uncommon for, you know, anxiety or OCD to also be accompanied by depression. And it could just be, you know, a coincidence. It's the same kind of like serotonin issue. Or it could just be that like you're so anxious for so long, your brain just sort of shuts off. Either way, it doesn't really matter. It's like how we heal it and how we work on it. So I kind of really started to sink into this depressive episode accompanied by this OCD. And at this point, Ben and I are back in San Francisco. We're far away from our family. A lot of our friends had moved out of the city. So my social life was really quiet. It was still kind of like quarantine time, so people weren't really going out as much. And I just kind of was like with my thoughts and with my feelings. And it was like a very dark place. Like it was the first time that I really was like, I don't know, like I just really was not happy being here. And I think that was like a big realization and like a very scary moment for me to be like at that low of a point, you know? I reached back out to my psychiatrist. I was working with my therapist. I got back on my SSRIs, and I did exposure and response therapy again. So with my therapist, I would expose myself to things that made my OCD really bad, which at this point it was still fixating on my relationship. And then slowly over time, when you're not doing the compulsion, eventually your brain learns like being like obsessing about this thing isn't giving me the reward of the compulsion anymore, so there's no point in me obsessing about this thing anymore. I also started neurofeedback, which was something that I had never tried before, but I read about it online and I was like, I will do anything to feel better. And I did it for a year. It definitely helped me the most in the beginning. Like when I was acutely depressed and acutely anxious, I really felt relief from it, and it would help me feel calm. I would highly recommend researching it if you're interested. Everybody has different experiences with it. Honestly, like the SSRIs are the biggest thing for me. Like I would advocate for everybody to take SSRIs if you need them and if you are prescribed. Like there should be no shame because they're literally game changing. I just feel like I'm able to handle things. Like I can take things with a grain of salt. It's easier for me to see something and not be like, immediately anxious about it. I can just see things and be like, yeah, well, that's annoying or whatever, and then like distance myself from it. Like I don't need to give every single feeling and thought that I have the time of day. My therapist also explained it to me as like, when you have OCD or anxiety, what feels like the biggest red alarm is actually just a broken fire alarm. Like he was like, you need to start to treat those thoughts as like an annoying fire alarm that's broken and won't stop ringing, but there's no fire. It's just broken and it's just ringing and it's really annoying. And so now sometimes when I have thoughts that I can clearly label as like an obsessive thought or an intrusive thought, I'm like, all right, the fire alarm's going off, but it's broken. I need to get somebody to fix that. Like, and I just sort of, I envision that in my head and it helps a lot. We're heading to PDQ, which I've never been there before, but our friend from
Virgins.
yeah, our friend from Florida that lives right around here was like, you need to go to PDQ. It's really good. It's like fast food, but chicken, I guess. I don't know. So we'll see. Now that I've taken you through my mental health journey, I wanted to talk about like where I'm at right now and what I do and what I like tips and tricks and things that I recommend to keep your mental health good, or like if you're going through a mental health crisis, what helped me when I was going through them. So I would say I'm pretty stable right now. This past January, I kind of went through the same thing again. It wasn't as bad, and I think it wasn't as bad because I knew what to expect. I don't know, I think time and time again, I've learned the importance, I guess this is like tip number 1, of not listening to what the anxiety is telling you. And I've talked about this before on TikTok, where I'm like, I'm so jealous of people that get to like trust their gut and trust their intuition. But as somebody with anxiety and OCD, like my intuition, I think, is just my anxiety trying to tell me what I should do. Like, I don't think it's the same as other people's intuition. So when I feel really anxious or nervous about something, what I've learned is that I shouldn't listen to that voice. I should basically do the opposite of what it's saying. And that has made such a big impact. It's hard because you're going against what your brain wants you to do, but ultimately it makes the anxiety go away faster. Another thing for me was just always reminding myself over and over again that like my thoughts are not real. They're not true. It's just a thought. Like your brain has a bunch of random thoughts throughout the day. You don't need to attach yourself to any of them. And it's just a thought. It doesn't need to be more than that. You don't need to make any decisions based off of it. Like you can have a thought or you can have a feeling and you don't need to do anything about it. And I like cannot stress enough the importance of a mental health like practitioner, whether it's a therapist, a psychiatrist, a combination of both, a counselor. I know it's kind of scary to start therapy if you've never done it before. I've been doing it since I was like 10. So at this point, I'm very like chill about it. But I think finding somebody that you get along with and that you like their style of therapy is really important. If you have health insurance, finding somebody that's covered by your health insurance is really helpful to start, because then it kind of lowers that barrier to entry of like, this is gonna be a lot of money. And also sometimes insurance will reimburse you. So you can submit claims like every month and get reimbursed for a portion of your therapy too. Something that I promised myself, I literally wrote it in my resolutions this year, was that I will not get off of my SSRIs. Because Ben's laughing. Ben's like, she will not get off her SSRIs. What happens is I start to feel better and immediately I'm like, all right, I don't need to take these anymore. I feel great. And then like 6 months later, my OCD is out of control. My anxiety is out of control. I feel really terrible and I'm like a shell of a person. And then when you feel good, you kind of black out the bad part. Like you forget how bad you feel when you're feeling bad. Stick with your therapy, stick with your medication. And some other things that really helped me, exercise. It's like the best endorphin release and it's such a place for me to work through that anxiety. Like I totally believe in the power of movement and moving through an emotion. And plus like doing something that makes you feel strong every single day, physically, helps you feel strong mentally. Things like making sure you're eating enough, making sure you're drinking enough water, and you're getting enough sleep. Those are really hard when you're in an active, like, anxious or anxiety, OCD, depression episode. It's really hard to do those things a lot of times. So it's not as easy as just being like, eat breakfast, drink water. But I'm talking more about like the maintenance side. Like when you're feeling good, just stay on top of stuff like eating enough food, drinking enough water, getting enough sleep. Because for me, if I'm bad on any of those things, especially the sleep one, my anxiety gets way worse. Scrolling less has helped me a lot. Like just really trying not to spend as much time on Instagram and TikTok, and like going on there only like once or twice a day, and like setting a timer. And then things like reading, like things that actually really get me out of my thoughts. Reading, watching like a really good TV show, watching foreign TV, and then having to turn on the subtitles, because you really have to like pay attention. You can't multitask because you need to be reading the subtitles. So something like that, or a really good book, is like such a good way for me to actually not be thinking about my thoughts. But yeah, I hope that helps. We're almost at PDQ, so I'll show you what our food looks like because I'm really curious to experience this. Alright guys, I think that's the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed this little mental health journey, chat, tips and tricks. I don't know, I wanna like destigmatize a lot of mental health stuff, especially OCD, because I feel like that to me was the most like hard thing to admit that I experienced and to talk about. Like anxiety and depression, I felt like I was more comfortable talking about, but OCD really just like, I struggled to talk about it and to feel comfortable talking about it because I was embarrassed, and I don't want anybody else to feel that way. And I also want to say that like, if you watched this video and you were like, I feel the same way, like I must have OCD too, or I must have anxiety too, please don't self-diagnose based off of me and my experience. Please talk to a professional, talk to friends and family, get help, and work with somebody that is like trained and knows what they're doing to get a diagnosis and to like figure out a treatment plan. Because just because this is my experience, it doesn't mean it's everybody else's experience. And just because you feel similarly to me, it doesn't necessarily mean you're struggling with what I am. So please work with a professional. But I hope this helped. Comment down below if this sparked anything for you. I would love to talk about it in the comments. And subscribe if you haven't. And I will see you in the next one. Bye.